all the way in. Okay? Over to you.
Hello and welcome. Faith, you're going to be accessing letting people come in. Okay, I'm Kathryn and hi, Sisters Ayye. I'm founder of GlobalWoman.com, a global community centered around the lunar cycles because I believe time is a feminist issue. And that's true. Faith and I worked together a few years ago, which in the current quality of time feels like a million years ago, in the time before the pandemic and before everything else. So what I just wanted to start with today quickly is just to give you, we were chatting about this before we came on, about how International Women's Day started, because I really feel like it's been lost in its evolution. So just quickly, in August 1910, there was an International Socialist Women's Conference was organized ahead of the general meeting of the Socialist Second International in Copenhagen, Denmark. So it all sounds pretty, you know, I just have this vision of these women running around the world in Northern Europe in the 1900s. And it was inspired by two women, two American socialists and German socialists, Clara Zetkin and Kate Dunker. So I'm pretty sure I haven't said that correctly. So they agreed that there would be to put aside a day each year to devote to promoting equal rights, including women's suffrage. And the original vision of the day was for working women. Clara Zetkin she identified as a, what did she identify? As a Marxist, a socialist, like she was really out there for, I guess, for what we consider now. The day was associated with far left movements. Clara Zetkin, she was deeply opposed to the term bourgeois feminism because it did not speak to nor aim for a complete social transformation, which I love, complete social transformation. So fast forward to 1987, when the marvelous Kimberlé Crenshaw first introduced the theory of intersectionality, when she wrote a seminal paper for the University of Chicago Legal Forum. Although the concept of intersectionality was not new, it was not formally recognized until Crenshaw's theory. And her inspiration for the theory started while she was still in college, and she realized that the gender aspect of race was extremely underdeveloped. She said, now more than ever, it's important to look boldly at the reality of race and gender bias and understand how the two can combine to create even more harm. So with that being said, I'm really excited and honored. Thank you, Faith, for inviting me to be here today to introduce to you our panel. Firstly, we have Ayya, who is in Hobart. Is that right, Ayya? You're in Hobart? Yes? Okay, and I'm sorry, I've lost my iPad here. Ayya is a Buddhist nun, a queer Buddhist nun of 21 years, and the director of Bodhicitta Foundation, a charity to help empower women, Indian women and disadvantaged children in central India. Ayya teaches internationally and is also a published author and sacred chants artist. She is the abbess of Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery in UNESCO protected World Heritage Forest in Tasmania, where she enjoys being a contemplative and occasional feminist human rights activist. Well, that just all sounds fantastic. I do not know how, speaking of time being a feminist issue, I'm completely in awe. Next, I'd love for you to meet Natalie, or Nat, Natalie Yan Chatonsky. Is that correct, Natalie? Thank you. Natalie is a social impact entrepreneur collaborating with organizations to meet their customers' unmet needs while adapting to disruption has been a recurring theme throughout her career. And what a time for disruption, Natalie. We are living in literally a disruptive reset, whatever this is, you know. So she has had an extensive career as a product innovator and plays an active role in driving the diversity and inclusion agenda in Australia. Inspired by conversations with her baby boomer parents on how to make a smooth transition from their full-time paid work to full-time living, Natalie co-founded full-time lives. With women leading longer, healthier lives than our elders, we need to prepare for different challenges. Ain't that the truth? As an ideas person, she sparks up whenever she's able to inspire a woman on the cusp of change to kickstart a new, meaningful, healthy, and connected chapter of their life. And I think that's so important, because for those of us socialized and raised as females, we tend to get given some boxes. So it's really important to break free of those, the cage that we are, the boxes of those the cage of those boxes. Natalie is also active in driving the diversity and inclusion agenda in financial services as the Deputy Chair of FinSIA's Diversity Advisory Council. I bear witness, I do not know what that is, Natalie, you'll have to tell us. And finally, I'm so excited. I'm excited to meet all of you, but Sister Zai Zander, is that correct, Sister Zai? Yes. Sister Zai Zander is a storyteller, educator, and curator of the Pan-African Poets Cafe, an Afro-literary matinee of beats, performance, and poetry. Since 2015, Sister Zai, should I say Sister Zai, has spoiled audiences in Melbourne and Sydney with over 100 performances by African and First Nation storytellers, including feature performances by renowned international artists, Mahogany L. Brown from New York City, Inua Ellams from Nigeria, UK, Kat Francois from the Trinidad and the UK, and Jivey Poetic from New York City. And I apologize if I haven't honored the correct pronunciation of their names. Amongst her other career highlights, Sister Zai has co-produced a sold-out Pan-African Poets Cafe event at the Arts Centre in Melbourne, #BlackGirlMagic. She's worked as a youth zone consultant for one of Africa's top 10 international art festivals, hosted the 2018 Melbourne Writers' Festival opening night gala, curated and produced live radio broadcasts of the Pan-African Poets Cafe, and is currently engaged as an artistic associate with Melbourne's Due West Festival. So let's do some stars to hello and welcome. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to welcome and to be part of this. Okay, so if you don't already know, the theme of International Women's Day 2021, channeling Clara Zetkin, is on breaking the gender bias. Clara might be a bit surprised that we're still working this shit out over 100 years on, but we've got the baton and we're going with it, Clara. So asking Ayya, Nat, and Sister Zai, what does the gender bias mean to you? Who'd like to? We're not here to play gender, we're playing Oppression Olympics. We're here to have an honest conversation about how bias plays out. I think it's beyond gender bias. I think we're talking about bias here. Sister,
why don't you just select somebody?
Sister Zai?
So if my audio is coming in kind of choppy, I will switch off my camera for a little bit, yeah? This is a really interesting question because of the way that we're framing it in Kimberly Crenshaw's analysis of, race and gender coming together to create more oppression or more harm. So as a person who's situated at that intersection of race and gender, which are colonial constructs, just putting it out there, because I am of Zimbabwe and I'm indigenous to Africa. So we have our own way of conceiving of the person and what it means to be human and fully liberated and self-actualized. But I'll work with a colonial definition. So as somebody who's situated at that intersection of race, so as a Black and gender woman, I think the gender bias really is framed in terms of patriarchy. So being on a hierarchy that's established in terms of power a hierarchy of power that operates to give more resources and more access to a very small group of people whose power and privilege and wealth is actually based on the exploitation of the majority, right? So the exploitation of our creative labor as an artist, the exploitation of our reproductive labor. So as a person who's a caregiver, if I haven't, birthed a human, and the exploitation of, our labor in general, right? Like if I'm in the workforce as well. So that's the bias, is that it works on a psychological level as well. So I can internalize that and then stop to advocate for better conditions, because I believe that somehow I am not worthy of asking for as much as the person who's placed arbitrarily at the top of this pyramid.
Thank you, Sisters Ayye. And I would just, a couple of years ago, I had this epiphany and I shared it with Faith because, generally around International Women's Day, we start seeing memes about, dismantle patriarchy and all of that. And, it all sounds great. It looks good. And then I had this epiphany, which I'd never had before, but I had this epiphany that how white supremacy and patriarchy are inextricably linked. And to dismantle patriarchy, one has to dismantle their own internalized white supremacy. And that was the game changer for me. I have to still, every day, I have to have that front and center of my life. So I never lose sight that those two things are inextricably linked. And to do my own work in dismantling, because we were all born into a society based around white supremacy and built on white supremacy. I am an Irish, my descendants are Irish who were exiled from their land and were essentially refugees and who came to Australia and then were occupiers of someone else's land. So I've had to dismantle all of that as well. But to your point, Sisters Ayye, about the hierarchy and the resources that are allocated and, the power and the resources being at the top and then just going down. And as it goes down, there's less access and there's less access to resources and power the further down you go. And for me, it's really important to have honest conversations about that, and they're not always easy. So thank you. And Nat, what would you like to say about that? About what does gender bias mean to you? How do you see it?
Yeah, so I guess it's probably the nature of the work that I do in terms of looking at product innovation. I always come back to data, and the data that I have from my role as being on the Diversity Council for FinCEA, which is a financial services association. The sorts of data that I see year on year out, I've been on the committee for about 8 years now, and we do a survey that involves professionals from all different levels in financial services and insurance. And unfortunately, the needle's not changing when it comes to gender divide. And in fact, what we're seeing in the last couple of years, the results have shown that things are going backwards for women. And perceptions have actually gotten worse. So the gap between how men and women see the issues around the incidence of the gender pay gap and also equal opportunity to job roles, promotions, all the data is there. It's been captured by WGEA around the same industry. But what we're seeing is the perception is different when we analyze the data and we see the response from men, and the response also changes depending on what level. So I guess the people who do grant those job opportunities and those pay rises may or may not see things differently from middle management. So it does fluctuate, but across the board, what we are seeing is, yes, there's a 25% pay gap between men and women in financial services. It's particularly bad in financial services, which is why I decided I wanted to be part of changing the narrative, because I work with lots of different industries, and financial services is probably the worst. Like tech, it's not too bad. There's probably different issues more around ageism as opposed to gender discrimination. So I guess the data that we're seeing in terms of what's actually happening, and also attitudes going backwards. And if you also look at it from a global scale, the World Economic Forum has released annual results around gender differences, and Australia's gone backwards over the last 15 years. So, and that's also reflected in our economic outcomes as well. So there is a definite difference in terms of the impact of women not progressing in their careers and the impact on the economy as well. So I guess coming back to your question around gender bias, I see it in the data that I see every day.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Natalie. It's pretty terrifying to hear that it's going backward over the last 15 years. Ayya, going from corporate Natalie to Ayya in Hobart. Ayya, what does gender bias mean to you in your world?
Well,
Ayya, are you there?
Can you hear me?
I think she's frozen. I think we're all frozen, actually.
Can you hear me?
Ayya, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
So I spent 14 years
Yes.
living in India as well, in a slum. So that's a fairly poignant example of the, you know, the disadvantage that some people, in fact, the majority of the world live with. Like half the world lives on $3.25 a day. And women live on even less than that, you know. So the people most affected by oppression, poverty, bad decisions made by powerful people are women of color. And particularly in India, women who are at the bottom of the caste system. As a Buddhist nun, I was under the illusion that feminism had made us all equal at growing up. And then I joined a religion and realized that no, but religion's always a little bit behind the rest of the world. So becoming a Buddhist nun made me, the overwhelming patriarchy I encountered in Buddhism made me a feminist, actually. So, but, you know, I think gender bias is basically living in someone else's story. And you're always, it's the accepted norm that you don't fit. And you're always expending a great deal of energy just to explain how you see things, because the story is written by rich, white, cis, hetero, able men. And everyone else, even working class men, disabled people, you know, women, queer people, people of color, everyone else, the majority, the working class, is out of that story. And they think, like in America, it's a perverse, like they've internalized, we believe we deserve to be poor, we don't deserve to have healthcare because we just haven't, we'll get the dream one day, you know, like, and they make you believe that the fact that they're in charge, the fact that they have everything and you don't have anything is somehow your fault. They pathologize anyone who is not them. And, you know, if a woman speaks up about oppression, about harassment, about the widespread violence against women, a woman is killed every 11 minutes by a man who claims to love her, or a family that claims to love her, but don't view her as an autonomous, equal human being. A woman will be pathologized as hysterical, as a man-hater. So you're just always expending, and the more of those intersections you tick, you know, disabled, poor, working class, woman of color, the more you will have to just expend a great deal of energy just to be heard and understood, because that they've worked very hard to reinforce that storyline of white supremacy, ableism. You know, there's a reason billionaires buy newspapers and control the stories that are written. So they are the architects of our society. They are the puppet masters telling us. It sounds a bit paranoid, but it's actually true. They are the ones telling us, you know, and so we have to struggle more to be heard. To me, that, and I really feel like sometimes, even though gender is a spectrum, I feel like sometimes I live in a totally different world to men. Like, what world are you living in? Because in the world that my cis white male friends live in, they can walk down the street at 11 o'clock at night in a pair of shorts, and most likely they're not going to be raped, or they're not going to have to think about that. You know, whereas in the world I live in, I have to look at every man who is 35% more upper body strength than me, probably a lot more, you know, $1 to every 75 cents I make. So I have to consider so many things they don't even think about. And they automatically, their privilege means that they get to dismiss my experience. And my privilege as a white woman often means I had previously, because of the way I was raised, dismissed the voices of other people who had a different experience, generally a more oppressed experience, who were propping up my privilege and my comfort and my life.
Yeah, when you see it, you can't unsee it. Yes, and they wonder, I saw a bus went by today and it had on it a poster that said "Why Women Kill." It was about a new series or something that's coming out. And in my mind, I'd rewritten the heading to "Why Women Don't Kill," because why we're not running around chopping, you know, taking it down physically, it's a miracle, you know. Somehow we're walking around in this world thinking it's all okay. I want to move on to our next question because of the time. As I mentioned earlier, without playing Oppression Olympics, which of the three isms, racism, ageism, and sexism, has had the most negative impact on you? Sisters Ayye, can we start with you again?
Sure. So
I think yeah, great.
Is that coming through? Great. So racism,
Yes.
sexism, ageism. You know, ageism isn't really a thing for me. It's not a thing because, actually, you know what? I think it works the other way, where folks look at me and they think I'm younger than I actually am. And so when I walk into spaces where I should have authority, because I know what I'm talking about, because I've done the work, they look at me like, you couldn't possibly have accomplished all of that in however many years they think I am. So there's that, you know, so there's that thing that, you know, I think the colonial, I call it the colonial capitalist patriarchy. The colonial capitalist patriarchy uses ageism in both directions to suppress folks, you know, because the young ones coming up sometimes have better ideas than we do. And in this day and age, I think, you know, having young friends is probably the way to survive. Like, they will keep you hip. Like, you will know how to navigate these systems. If we're listening to the young people, we will really know how to navigate, you know? And likewise, if they're listening to us, and they also can understand like some of the, you know, the intricacies that you only get through living through things, you know, and experience. But it's, and I think that in itself, so racism, that leaves like racism and sexism. My goodness, I kind of think, you know, those two come together, those two conflate, and they create more harm. So I'm gonna take Bell Hooks's, because Bell Hooks came in and she kind of did a critique of Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality, saying that it's become too abstract, right? So a lot of people have a hard time grasping it, you know, outside of like academia. So she was like, I just prefer my definition when I go in and I say to people, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, right? Let's call it what it is. And she also acknowledges that, or she acknowledged that whenever she said that, many people in the audience would laugh as a sign of discomfort, because what she was doing was pointing to every single oppression. And then you had to look at, where am I situated? So I'm in Australia. Well, technically, this is an imperial nation. I benefit from being here. So yeah, race, gender, but in comparison to another nation where Australia exercises dominance, I'm in a position of power. How my tax money is being used to fund whatever operation to help people somewhere, you know, I'm in a position of power. So imperialist, white supremacists, I've internalized white supremacists. So we're talking about that already, right? So born middle class in Africa, went to private girls' schools. I'm very, you know, I'm doing my PhD. So I have a lot of power within that white supremacist system, even though I struggle and there are challenges within that system. When it comes to the power that I exert over other folks who are of the same color, the same race, and the same gender as myself, but located outside of those systems, I have a lot of power.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then, so imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, so capitalism already there. I mean, like that could be unpacked forever. So I don't want to get into that too much, but I think for me, capitalism really is about the way that economics influences my relationships, my most intimate relationships. So at this age, so now let's talk about age a little bit. As we get into, and I think everybody has this, within capitalism, when it talks about distribution of wealth and resources within families that have accumulated assets, what women end up with is very problematic. So the patriarchy rears its head in those instances, right? So capitalism then, for me, when I think about like the gains that have been made through feminism, I then have to locate it, as Bell Hooks did, and go, well, how much respect do I actually receive in the home? How much respect do I actually have in my most intimate relationships? Because I can go out into the workplace and advocate and get, you know, the pay rise and all this sort of stuff. But if I'm coming home and I'm not being treated with respect, and if I'm being spoken to disrespectfully, what's the point of all of that? And that to me is capitalism. It's also internalized white supremacy. It's also imperialism, because I think it was Gloria Steinem who said that the wars of aggression or imperial attacks will increase because, and like the rate at which they're increasing matches the rate at which women are being killed in their homes. So that, I mean, that's got to give us room to pause and reflect. So I think which one affects me the most? They all come in different ways, depending on how I'm located in relationship to a particular person or a particular circumstance. So in a way, that framework, if I take Bell Hooks's imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, helps me to situate where I have power, so that I can then modify my behavior and take responsibility within that relationship, so I don't keep on enacting that colonial capitalist patriarchy. And I can disrupt it at a place where I actually have power. Because otherwise, then I'm just rendered a victim. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. I'm a victim of racism. Yep, it's true. But I'm also a middle-class Black woman with a PhD. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Ayye. It's a very insightful insight. I mean, that's sort of reductive, but it's, yeah, very powerful. Now, I'm also cognizant of time. So Nat and Ayya, and I love how you brought capitalism to as probably the most problematic out of all the isms. Which of the three isms has had the most negative impact on you, Ayya and Nat?
I'll just quickly jump in. I'd say racism during my childhood. It's really marked me, but I guess because a lot of it was internalized, And when I look at, you know, the way I behave, and it's taken a lot to unravel all that as an older person, and being a lot more analytical about how I think, because I think about how it influenced me in, I guess, the way I speak and look at things, how I've partnered up. You know, there was a bit of shame as a child of being able to speak Chinese, because I was mostly surrounded by a very white environment at school and in my neighborhood. So you kind of follow the societal norms around you in terms of, well, who's progressing? I want to be like that. I want to be popular, so I'll behave like that. So I guess, although I haven't really faced much racism later in life, I have really very much taken that on. And but then I'd like to think that it's made me a lot more empathetic towards people who are different, and really question how I think and behave, and where does my information come from, how am I being influenced, and always constantly checking in with myself when I make decisions, and you know, whether it's choosing to work with certain people, trying to really break out of the comfort zone to try and work with people who have a very different life experience from myself, because I know that that will enrich me and the way we can build things together.
And what I love about the three of you speaking is you come from such different worlds and different life backgrounds, and that's the power of it. Ayya, which of the three isms has had the most negative impact on you?
I think some of the isms that have impacted me are not mentioned, but probably should be in a conversation about intersectional feminism, which is ableism, classism, yeah, and other things. For me, ageism hasn't been a huge issue because as a larger size woman, I was already invisible on the scale of beauty, which is how attractive you are to men. And plus I'm celibate. So I was already invisible there. And I think sexism has had a huge impact on me because as a nun in Buddhism, I had nowhere to live, even though the men lived in palaces. Although Australian monks also had a pretty hard time, but the Tibetan monks, you know, they were really living like kings and they had so much power and respect, you know, and we were pretty much told, oh, it's your bad karma to be born as a woman. So just slog away and pray to be reborn as a man, you know, and just, yeah, I mean, I just really hit the glass ceiling and I just kind of realized how malicious but also strangely seductive patriarchy is and how strong it is, you know. But I'm also I have an illness that will eventually kill me, and I also have struggled with poverty. I was a street kid. I didn't even finish high school, so you know, all of those things have, but they've, you know, been challenging, but they've also made me more resilient and empathetic. And I think being a Buddhist nun, like Natalie mentioned, empathy, right? How you work with people different to you. As a Buddhist nun, you're a bit of a unicorn. It's like walking around in drag, you know, or big bird costume or something. You're just a bit odd and different and a black sheep. So you tend to attract other black sheep. And then I really learned a lot more about society, because all these people who were slightly vulnerable felt attracted to my role as a black sheep, I guess. So that's been very humbling.
To your point about being, you know, the bad karma, from my own time in India, and I had a astrology reading that it was my first entree into astrology, and I was told that I wouldn't get married, and that was if I worked hard in this lifetime, I would have good karma, so I would get married. I could get married in my next lifetime. I was like, okay, yeah, right, okay. That's, and of course I'm not married, and that's okay. but that was like the definitive, you know, the goal, be the prize. So, but anyways, I'm just cognizant of time, so we're going to have to get moving. Natalie, I want to come to you and ask you, how do you recognize your own privilege? And I think you've already spoken to this, to extend a hand to other women and other people as well.
Yeah, I thought about this question. I think it comes down to looking at where you've had personal or professional successes and look at who helped you along the way. The most recent piece of research I'm doing for a book that I'm writing, interviewing a lot of women who are at the cusp of change or have gone through major life and work changes. And when I asked them what were the key success factors in overcoming the hard bits when they went through those major life changes, they all said it came down to the connections, having a supportive network, whether it was friends or mentors, a partner. It could be any one of those things or a combination of those things. It comes down to who you can meet. If you don't have those supportive people in your network, go and find them, because a lot of them did say, well, I recognize I wasn't being surrounded and supported by the type of people who would help me progress and grow into the person I wanted to be in my next chapter. And you sometimes need to do a little bit of pruning and go out and search and ask people to mentor you or, you know, become close to. So I think it's down to the people. And so therefore, if we are in a privileged position and we've all got something to give, we've all got knowledge and experience, we've all got passions. And if we've got the time and energy, if we can somehow connect with someone one-on-one or one-to-many, like there's so many different ways you can impart and share your experience in order to prop someone else up. And there's so many different ways to do it. And that's what excites me about a community of women, particularly in the Silver Sirens community, because there's lots of different women who all want to help and are curious and also want to learn and grow.
And we spoke to this earlier, something that Sisters I said about, you know, resources, because usually resources move upward, but in this extending a hand, we're moving outward, really. So Ayya, I want to come to you now. How, and I think you've already spoken to this as well, you know, when you spoke about empathy, about recognizing your own privilege, and I know that you've spoken to that, and extending a hand to other women.
What do you want me to say? Like, there's a need for it?
How have you recognized your own privilege? And I'm sure you really have spoken to this already.
Have I, or how did I?
Well, both. How have you recognized your own privilege, which I think you've spoken to, you have spoken about that, and how you use that recognition to extend a hand.
Yeah. I just want to say something, you know, I think talking about your own challenges, your own experience of oppression doesn't have to be oppression Olympics. It becomes oppression Olympics when you say, well, I'm suffering the most, so other people need to be silent, like when you use it to silence others or shame others. But just speaking about your own experience of oppression, I think is not bad. You know, and I think that actually helps us all to to open our hearts and gain more empathy for the way some women are living. I was keenly aware of my white privilege in India because people would take what I said more seriously than they would an Indian social worker. And Indian social workers knew much better than me what poor people themselves knew much better than me what they needed, you know? And that was a legacy of colonialism. But I also was just very aware of my economic privilege in India because I would go and chant. That was just my way of connecting with the local Buddhist people in India. And someone put a dying, malnourished baby in my arms and said, pray for this baby. And I just looked at this baby and I thought, this baby doesn't need chanting. This baby needs a $2 antibiotic that will save its life. And for them, $2 is a couple of days money. And for me, it's nothing. And I just realized, like, I was in a position to do something, and there was a tremendous need, a tremendous suffering. 40,000 kids die every day due to diarrhea, bad water, neglect. And they don't need to, And when I realized, like, okay, I don't have a lot of money in Australia, but when I live in India, I don't need a lot. And it just grew from there, this incredible idea that I had this amazing magical key to open the gateway of privilege, that, the highway of resources between two worlds. One world where people didn't have enough, and the other world where people probably had more than they needed. And that's how I started a charity that helps 2,000 people a year.
Yeah, fantastic. I remember I remember being at a retreat in India, and and this Indian man said to me, in India, there is no such thing as food waste. And for me, because, we waste so much in the West. There's so much wastage. Sisters Ayye, and I think you've spoken to this as well, how have you recognized your own privilege and to use that to extend a hand to specifically other women?
Well, I mean, in a nutshell, my podcast is where I put a lot of that information, and it's I want to draw on something that Ayya said earlier, which is the seductive power of the patriarchy, and that's what I'm really talking about in my podcast. But I'm talking about the patriarchy in terms of capitalism, the colonial capitalist patriarchy, because when you grow up middle class in Africa, you don't get to see impoverished people. Like, you can live your life without seeing that, even though that surrounds you, and so it was good for me to be able to leave and travel overseas and become the object of other people's stigmas and prejudices and biases, so that I could then start to unpack how my social class had been constructed as an actual tool of colonial oppression. So I think, when you exist as a person of color in this world, it's really important to realize how we are co-opted into colluding with these systems of oppression. And so colonialism can end, but the way that we think and behave can continue to enact the oppression on people. And so this is where we see, like right now in the Ukraine, with all these students, these African students who are stuck at the border. Why haven't their governments done anything? It's because there's people in government are actually colluding with the systems of oppression, which operate on the terms of race, gender, sexism, all of this is operating there. And because these folks, so I'm part of that demographic of people, the people who were trained as technicians to apply rules that keep in place the international system, right? So when we're talking about how do I extend a hand to other women, we need to take this shit down. It needs to go. We're talking about like mass transformation at a social level, like systemic level. It's got to begin here in the mind. We've got to start decolonizing our minds. We have to like divest from white supremacy in every single way that we behave, in all of our interactions, our relationships, and then we have to build. So when we build businesses or we build organizations, we are actively anti-capitalist, actively anti-capitalist, and we don't pretend to do it perfectly because we live in these systems. But what we do commit to is to carry on doing it, right? And so what Silver Sirens is doing is great. Those are all the things like ageism, like what's that? Sexism, what's that? Racism, do we really need that? So yeah.
I just want to go back to, thank you, Sisters Ayye, but Clara Zetkin, who was one of the visionaries in 1910 or so, who foresaw the need for International Women's Day. And eventually she, I think, became the head of the Communist Party in Germany or something, and Hitler outlawed the party. But I think she was a member of the parliament. So she gave a speech where she spent 40 minutes denouncing Hitler. And then I think she left the country because she was, yes. So yeah, to your point, like this is lifelong work, you know, and it's up to all of us to do this work consistently. Now, I know the next question, and to close, I know we've gone 5 minutes over, but I just want to throw it out there. How do you experience ageism every day? Like, I'll disclose here that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I used to work in the sex industry, which is where I became a feminist on the front line. You know, it's really the cold face of feminism. If you're not a feminist when you go in, you are when you come out, you know, because it's just such a fantastic, rich environment to see it all playing out. Capitalism, patriarchy, white, it's all happening, you know. So like my kind of mindset is like, I don't give a fuck. As having dealt with that, I just don't give a fuck, you know. But speaking to you, sisters, Nat, Ayya, how do you experience ageism? Just quickly in closing.
I'd say a lot of it's internalized.
Sorry, what was that?
I'd say it's internalized a lot. Whenever we tell ourselves we're too old for that. Well, what too old for, according to which generation? And, you know, these days we are living longer, healthier lives. So we do need to reset our attitudes. So like, I guess just hearing people say those sorts of things all the time really bothers me. I really try and address it. When I hear it, I've stopped myself from saying it. And therefore you stop thinking about it once you're kind of aware of how much it's everywhere.
Yeah, one of the phrases that I hear a lot is, and it's meant to be a compliment, but it's not, is you look good for your age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ayya, Sisters how do you experience aging? It's like aging is the very worst thing that can happen to a woman, apparently. The very worst thing. So there's a lot of money tied up in that.
I mean, aging and ageism are different, you know. Aging is, for me, it's a little sad, also because I have an illness that I kind of know I'm closer to death. And, you know, like my body aches a little bit. And, you know, when you're young, you think you have time to fulfill certain dreams. And as you get older, you kind of get a bit more realistic, like, well, I'm not going to be, you know, Australia's #1 pop star. Not that that's something I ever really wanted, but, you know, you just kind of get a bit more realistic, like, and also there is this huge emphasis in society of like the hope of youth, you know, and all the stories and the heroines, and, you know, they're all young and beautiful, and so you don't see yourself reflected in that anymore. You know, there's not a lot of positive, apart from maybe Helen Mirren. And I mean, there are a few, you know, really inspiring older women, but you have to look for them, you know, where they're not in your face, like the young, hot white women, thin white women.
Always thin.
Yeah, but I notice how much I have internalized patriarchy, and I look at myself through the male gaze, you know, like sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm like, you know, who would want me, or I'm a bit too fat, or, you know, and then I'm like, stop it, you're a nun. Or like, you know, and then I remind myself, like, you know, what is true beauty? True beauty is like your capacity to have empathy and have a kind and compassionate heart, and to have developed wisdom, to have lived fully. Like, isn't it so funny? We're so eager to get rid of the baby body when we've done this miracle of creation. Not saying that that's all women are for, but it is an amazing thing some women choose to do. And rather than appreciating and taking time to see these marks of what a woman has gone through, like all those lines on your face, all those stretch marks on your belly, that's a life well lived. And we're so ashamed of it. We're encouraged to just view ourselves as, you know, our worth as much as we are desirable to men, you know, and the politics of desirability is still a very big factor, I think, in how we treat each other. I'd really like to see that change, you know, and building solidarity beyond the nuclear family, because more and more, you know, divorces are happening. People are realizing, you know, maybe they're never going to find the one, and people grow apart. To invest in community and extend your circle of love beyond just your partner and your kids and your parents, you know, and to build a sisterhood with other women, and, you know, yeah, to just re-envision family and community, and to re-envision beauty.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that idea of romantic love is, or, you know, the monogamous family, whatever that is really another symptom of another expression of capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy and all of that sort of nonsense. Sisters, did we ask you about how do you experience ageism? I can't remember. I'm sort of got a lot of things going on.
That's cool. I think I did touch on it. Ageism isn't, you know, in terms of getting or being perceived as getting older. So like I've noticed how Western societies, westernized industrialist societies tend to invisibilize women, which is really troubling because I come from a society where we really look after our elders and we have a lot of respect for women as they get older. And as a woman, you kind of take on more of I mean, it's very binary, this language, but you take on more of like an elder statesman role. So I'm kind of settling in with my family. Like I really push it. Like I really push one of my titles a lot these days. I'm like, I wear the pants around here. Like, which is a bit of like internalized patriarchy, you know, like, but at the same time, I'm kind of like playing the patriarchy against itself, which is a lot of fun. And it's kind of like the cheekiness that you're allowed to embody because you live outside the rules a bit when you get older, you know, like life becomes a little more fun. You don't have to like subscribe to any of the things that will, you know, make you a good marriageable woman. It's like, well, that's over. Or, you know, being like a responsible mother, well, that's over. So now I can do girls trip, and you know, nobody can say anything. Like, live with it. So I'm actually really excited for this stage.
Oh, that's
I'm really excited for it.
Oh, thank you so much. And Faith, do we have time for a question?
Let's do one. I'm sorry, does any of you have to jump off dead on 8? So we got time for like to go over a few minutes? Just do one question? Yeah, okay, let's do one. So let's see, anyone in the room, the virtual room, has got a burning desire to ask our speakers one question. Okay, I'm going to put the gallery on. Just put your hand up. Oh, I don't see any hands going up. Are there no questions?
Just
Kathryn. I'm going Kathryn. I'm going to ask Kathryn.
Okay.
Kathryn's going, don't ask me.
No, I'm thinking it's so interesting. I'm loving everything I've heard about extending your hand of privilege and looking at self through the male gaze. One thing about extending and recognizing your own privilege, I don't know, like it's an interesting question. Faith's always been really kind of like if you're looking at, say, things like Close the Gap or something that you would like to support, Faith's always kind of helped me kind of see how maybe I can amplify other people's voices. I don't have to kind of create my own kind of version of Close the Gap. I guess I'm just interested, you know, in everyone's take on what, you know, in terms of extending your own privilege, but specifically maybe going across into cultural areas that might not be your own cultural area, say Indigenous literacy, or, you know, like the best way to support, you know, and that's why the Silver Siren space is so great because it's such a diverse space. But if you do want to go into a cultural space, I don't know whether it's Afghan Hazara women or Indigenous communities, like what are some good ways to extend privilege, my privilege into that space? Any ideas?
Great, I think that's a great final question. So anyone, let's go to our panel. Who wants to go first?
I think we can always look at,
Yeah, go for it. Yes,
Hello?
this is I. Yeah.
I'll be quick because there's a few of us won't respond. I think it's always good to like look at the kind of like the guidelines that have been established by Indigenous folks, particularly around like cultural appropriation and how we can mediate that, because it's happening, right? It happens all the time. So working directly with elders, lineage elders. So folks of that particular background who are particularly influential and have been working in that space for a while. So making sure that you listen to them and you take their lead and you give them space to lead, whatever it is that you're trying to do. I think being in relationship with people, like genuine relationship, and not coming, because there's that whole power imbalance that comes in with the saviorism that I also have to look at. That I'm not coming in as a Black savior.
Yeah.
I have to be in relationships. So really taking time to build relationships with people.
Yeah.
Real authentic relationships with people.
Yeah. Thanks, Sister Zai. Great to hear you. Great to hear everyone.
I would just like to speak to that as well. One of the things that I committed to once I linked patriarchy with white supremacy is I really, as where possible, I only, people get kind of freaked out, but I only read books firstly by women, written by women, and specifically women of color. And that has been the greatest eye-opener for me. I unfollowed everyone on Instagram who was the influencer or, was promoting a standard that just didn't align with who I am and what I'm interested in. And, unfollowing that and following, voices of women of color specifically, and has really been a game changer. It's the way I'm learning, it's listening, learning, and also investing in paying people for that work is really, really important. So that's one of the things that I'm doing. So I have this book list on Booktopia that's just got hundreds of books. And when I have some spare cash, I just go in and I get my books and they're all over the table and I just pick them up. And it's been so interesting. So, and I've found those people, like those authors, from really following women of color on Twitter and Instagram. They're always showing what they're reading. And I go, okay, I'm going to add that to my list.
Awesome. I suppose the same could be with women founders or anything, like women of colour founders or...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rachel Rogers is doing some great work. She runs Hello 7 and she's helping women, especially women of colour from minority communities, have wealth and build wealth and grow wealth. She's got a book called, what's her book called? We Should All Be Millionaires. And I've also put Sister Zai's podcast link in the profile in our chat as well.
Do we have time just to go to Ayya and Natalie just to answer that question, and then we'll wrap up there. So Ayya, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly in this role in India. And it's difficult sometimes because I've lived there a long time and I'm part of the community and I know what the problems are, but if I as a white person say this thing that makes usually upper class Indians uncomfortable, they're like, you're a white woman, you need to shut up. So like on one hand they're perfectly justified in saying that because my ancestors completely defrauded their country and then said it was their fault. So that's not always an easy position to be in. But I think if you're going to work with people from a different culture, you need to be quiet for a long time before you act and listen and be humble, because those people know what they need. Your job is to just amplify their voices and, refine the vision in consultation with them, as an equal and very, very aware that of the power you have, so that you're always trying to respect them and make sure they're part of the consultation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Natalie, do you want to finish? Yeah.
Just only to iterate, to listen and ask questions. I've found that the older I get, I say less and ask more and watch and observe. And that's become a skill that I feel is more and more valuable in terms of the work that I do. Like when we're creating new products and services, it's not trying to change the way people behave by forcing things on them, but it's observing what unmet needs are there, what are their pain points. And sometimes they can articulate it, sometimes you just have to sit and watch. And then kind of, I do a lot of experimentation and run, product innovation experiments. So sometimes it's about co-design and, really looking at the human as a whole, what are their functional needs as well as emotional needs, having a conversation and then jointly designing something and testing it out.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Right.
Kathryn. Okay, so over to you. Do you want to just wrap up, Kathryn, and then I'll close.
I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and offering your time and your wisdom and your presence. I want to specifically thank Ayya. I want to specifically thank Natalie and Sisters Ayye for your wisdom, for your courage, for your bravery. And I think Claire Zetkin back in the day, over 100 years ago, would be proud of us sitting here, keep it moving forward, keeping our eyes on championing the working woman every time we see her.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Kathryn, for your great job as MC. It was fantastic. So I really appreciate all that you bring to this space. And just thank you again, Natalie, Ayya, Sisters Ayye. That was such an interesting conversation. I was riveted. I took lots of notes. I learned so much, and I always want Civil Science to be a space that we bring really interesting, and diverse and really conversations that are needed to the forefront. So thank you for being a part of that. If you want, if you need a copy, any of the speakers, let me know and I'll get a copy of this to you. And for everyone else, the copy of this will be in the portal to access from next week. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you,
And
Faith.
Ayya, thank you for staying in your car. What commitment. I'm just so impressed with your commitment.
Bye. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.